Hello and thank you for joining in on today's training. Heart and Solutions is a proud provider of CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below to find and take your quiz.
Just getting started. Welcome to another episode of You Need a Training. In today's episode, we will be focusing on infant attachment and bonding, exploring how play and play therapy can foster our earliest relationships. My name is Montana Meyer, and I'm a therapist at Heart and Solutions. I am honored today to be able to bring this training to all of you. And so today's training is going to focus on infant mental health and infant attachment and bonding, exploring how FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy can help foster a healthy relationship between infant and their parent or caregiver. And today's training is presented by Candace Rutkowski. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapist supervisor. She's been serving children and their parents and caregivers for over 10 years. Candace believes that healing happens within the context of healthy relationships, both within and outside of families, and that the parent and caregiver-child relationship is one of the most important building blocks of life. Candace provides individual and family play and talk outpatient therapy to children 0 to 12 years old and their parents and caregivers. And so Candace, take us away.
Wonderful. Hi, Montana. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning if you're watching this in the morning live or recorded, and good afternoon and evening if you are watching it those times of the day and wherever you are. I want to piggyback off of something Montana said. Yes, this is a 2-hour training, so please take care of yourselves. Get up and stretch, grab some water, grab a snack if you need to, run to the restroom if you really need to, that's fine. But yeah, please take care of yourself. And we are going to be talking about infants and early childhood mental health today. And so naturally, that can just be a little triggering at times, or just allows us to ponder about our own lives and experiences. So, if you're noticing anything happening for you, please add those extra tools if you need to. And we're going to do an activity in a little bit that I will remind you to take care of yourself during that as well. So yes, we'll be talking about infant attachment and bonding today, and play therapy, of course. And when we get to that point about play therapy, we'll be talking about FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy. And so I'll talk about that and what that is and what it all looks like later on. So as Montana said, I'm Candace. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapist supervisor. I own a private practice in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, called Holding Space Therapy, and I only serve children birth to 12. So today, here's our agenda, just to walk us through, what the path will be. As we know, right, the brain and the nervous system likes structure and likes to understand what's happening as much as possible. And that's, helps us feel safe. And, we want to think about that concept today as we focus on the babies and the littles. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of my story and share with you my history and, how I got to where I am today. Then we're going to do a self-check-in activity, some mindfulness-based work and somatic-based work. And then we're going to dive into the topic of infants. And, you can talk about so many different things when you are working with infants or presenting on infants and the littles. So the topics there that you see, we're going to define infant and early childhood mental health. We're going to talk about brain development, attachment and bonding, play, of course. And then we'll have some discussion about co-regulation, the ACEs, and then we'll end our 2 hours talking about FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy. So a little bit about myself. I have always had a lifelong love for children. They are just the most fascinating people on this planet. Whether they are a big kid or a little kid, they just have curiosities that most adults don't have anymore, right? We kind of lose that potentially over time. And they see things that we can't see anymore, or don't take time to see anymore. and they just have the best stories and the best perspectives. And there have been many times in my life where I have thought, after speaking with a little kid, if it was allowable, I would totally vote for this kid to be president of the United States, just because they have so much beauty and things to offer. So when I was a teenager, I decided at one point that babysitting was my job, and that was going to be fun, and it was. I got some interesting experiences, but I didn't really know anything about child development or brain science or attachment and bonding when I was a babysitter. They don't teach teenagers that stuff usually. At least they didn't back in the 2000s when I went through that. And I got to babysit my younger sister's friends at times, so that was pretty fun. But when I got to high school, that's when I started to realize that, being a helper was my path, and it wasn't really something that I ever strayed away from. And, when I was 15, I realized, gosh, all my friends are coming to me and asking me for advice about stuff. And at the time, I thought it was great, and I thought I was giving the best advice. And then with my adolescent brain also, I figured, well, gosh, if I can get paid to tell people what to do, that's going to be a great job. So when I took a psychology course and learned about clinical, like CBT work, I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a CBT psychologist. So when I eventually went on to college at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, I decided to, go for the psychology major. But then when I learned that they have child psychology, I switched my major instantly. So I declared quite early on compared to my peers, and I just knew that child psych was my path. So when it came time to, get ready for graduation and figure out what's the next step, I always knew, I wanted to be a therapist and I wanted to work with kids in some capacity. And when I got into St. Mary's University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, I studied marriage and family therapy. And then I learned that they had a 5-course play therapy program. So I absolutely jumped on that. I had no idea what play therapy even was. What does that mean? And those courses changed, honestly, the course of my career and my life. I really came to realize this is how we work with kids. Play makes sense. Play is how children make sense of their world and themselves and their families, their friends. So why would I do anything different? I want to meet kids where they're at and support them with, what's age appropriate. So after grad school, I did the licensure thing and, recorded my hours, got my experience, worked, and I got licensed in Minnesota in 2016. And then I went through more supervision, more hours, and got my RPT credential, my registered play therapy. I was one of those that decided during the 2020, the start of the pandemic, that it was time to open my own business. So that was a whirlwind of an experience. And I opened Holding Space Therapy up in the Twin Cities. And then, life took some turns and made some changes. And I decided that I wanted to come back towards my home base in Northern Illinois. So I came back and settled in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I brought Holding Space Therapy with me. And I got licensed here in Wisconsin in 2021. And then in 2023, I went through more courses and became a licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapy supervisor. So that is a service that I'm offering now as well. So that's just a little bit about me. After this training, if you ever feel called to reach out to me for any reason, please do. And I'm always looking to network with other child therapists across the nation. So now I just want to move us into a self-check-in activity. So wherever you are in the world today, whatever you're going through, I want you to just start taking some deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth, as you know how to do, and get settled in your seat. Really feel that cushion under you and behind you. Feel those shoes and that floor on your feet and underneath your feet. And if you feel called to, go ahead and close your eyes. If you don't feel called to do that, that's okay. You can just find a space somewhere on the wall or on your table, or just stare at my face the whole time. That's fine too. So I want you to think about yourself as best as you can as a baby or a young child. See if you can recall maybe some of your earliest memories. And even see if you could recall who took care of you during those early years of your life. And if you happen to have this information, reflect on your prenatal and postpartum and even birth experience, when you were in the womb growing, and then, when you were born and after the fact. And just notice what's going on inside of you as you're connecting to your younger self. Any thoughts, emotions, even somatic experiences. And like I alluded to earlier, if anything uncomfortable is coming up or just a little discombobulating, feel free to stop doing this and come back to full present and check in with yourself, take care of yourself. And then as you're breathing and you're just sitting there with yourself, eventually I want you to shift your thinking and your feelings about the adults and the children that you serve in your clinical practice. No matter how you work, whether that's in, an office, in the community, in the schools, in the homes. So see if you can bring up maybe a particular child or family to mind, maybe one that you're struggling to serve just because there's so much complexities. And, maybe you're thinking, what direction do we go with today? How do we do this? And then notice your thoughts and your emotions and your somatic experiences, even with thinking about that family or that child. So keep breathing throughout this activity. And eventually, when you're ready, I want you to just, take that extra deep breath. I want you to put your hand on your heart and say to yourself, I can handle this and I am loved. And keep breathing. And when you're ready, come on back officially to present. And, the reason why I decided to add something like this into my trainings and presentations is because I think the world of infant and early childhood mental health is one that is so complex. And we'll talk about, some details related to that in a second. But, when we're serving the youngest of our population, our human species, it can be a lot. There are so many layers to serving young ones and their caregivers. And the more I dive into this world and work in this world, this particular population, I realize as much as we have to be there for the babies, we have to be there just as much, if not more, for the grown-ups. As we know as clinicians and people that serve, families, we know that things get passed down through the generations. The health, the struggle, the trauma, the joy, positive, negative, neutral, all that. So if we really want to make change for our future, yes, we want to serve the babies. We want to serve the littles. We want to give them the tools that maybe we didn't have. But in order to successfully do that, we really need to be serving the grown-ups that are in their lives, especially in the home, but also outside of the home. We do need to think systemically when we work with the littles and the babies. And we need to pull in as many professionals from across, disciplines as we can. And we'll talk more about that part in a second. So congratulations, you are, maybe in your first step of serving the babies, and maybe you are already seasoned and you're just going to get potentially a different perspective of this work. So in order to, really start serving this population, we just need to understand what is infant and early childhood mental health anyways. So 0 to 3 defines infant and early childhood mental health as it's the developing capacity of the infant, young child to form close and secure relationships, experience, manage, and express a full range of emotions, and explore the environment and learn, all in the context of family, community, and culture. So that right there tackles that systemic piece. We need to be looking at who all is involved with these littles, and how do we support them so that they can be the best grown-ups to the littles, and then we give the littles the best support and tools we can so they can grow up to be the best grown-ups they can be. And when life does come with struggle, because we all experience it, what are the tools out there, and what's that resiliency within us that we can pull from to connect to the tools inward and outward? So as we think about, infant and early childhood mental health, as well as the history of this population, we want to always think about Dr. Donald Winnicott. And he was a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst. He lived from 1896 to 1971, as you see there. And a lot of literature describes him as the father of infant mental health. So he actually, as he was growing up, there's literature that describes him saying that he felt oppressed actually by his mother and other caregivers in his life. And he noted that his mother seemed to struggle with depression throughout his childhood, and that made an impact on not only his relationship with her, but himself in some ways. So one of his famous quotes here that I wanted to share is that there is no such thing as the infant, meaning, of course, that whenever one finds an infant, one finds maternal care, and without maternal care, there would be no infant. So again, right, very systemic. And I want to always add a caveat into anytime we talk about, not only working with infants and littles, but just children in general. We're not just focusing on the mother-child relationship, right? Obviously, that's an important relationship, and we need that relationship. But if there's a father involved as well, we need to be considering him in all of this conversation as well. Because as we know, right, mothers and fathers play very important roles for their children. So, when we want to think systemically, we want to think even bigger than that. So if there's a family where, whether it's a one-parent family or a two-parent family, if there's extra caregivers, we want to be including them in these definitions and, in these thoughts as well. So Dr. Winnicott, he had this idea of what he called the capacity for being, as in B-E-I-N-G, if I'm saying that clearly enough, being. And he actually felt that play was something that would foster the ability to feel genuinely alive inside. And that's his definition of the capacity for being. And he felt that this was was essential actually to the maintenance of a true self. So I do want to give a shout out though to his second wife, Claire Britton. She was a psychiatric social worker, and during the Second World War, Dr. Winnicott and Claire actually consulted and collaborated, and they met during that time. And we want to give her credit for Dr. Winnicott's, concept of play and his beginning thoughts about play and children and what does play do for them. So it's very always interesting, right, to figure out where do people get their thoughts and feelings and what and who influences them. So it was out of that partnership that he really started to shift his thinking for play. So the next person that we want to talk about is Selma Freiberg. She was alive from 1918 to 1981, and she was an American child psychoanalyst. So she actually coined the phrase infant mental health. That's what a lot of the literature shows. And she was one of the founding board members of 0 to 3. So she was a director for the Child Development Project, and she was out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And she and her colleagues worked with children 0 to 3 years old. And their main goal was to decrease the serious developmental failure and relationship disturbance for these children. So they worked in the homes and they observed the babies, their parents, and the relationship between the two individuals. So they were very systemic in nature and looking at the whole kit and caboodle there and all the aspects to children. So keep in mind too, as we go through this training, that, infant and early childhood mental health is, again, systemic, but, what does that mean in some capacity? Yes, all the people and the systems, but if we were to, I think of it, if we were to make it as basic as possible, we're looking at both individuals as individuals, but then we're looking at that relationship between them. And that in and of itself could be considered, its own client, if you will, or its own entity of the human experience that needs support and intervention. So one thing that Selma is, really famous for as well is her paper called Ghosts in the Nursery. So she defines ghosts in the nursery as visitors from the unremembered past of the parents, the uninvited guests at the christening. So I want to pause for a minute. What an interesting definition, right? Let me reread that. So ghosts in the nursery are the visitors from the unremembered past of the parents, the uninvited guests at the christening. That feels pretty powerful if you really think about that and really think again about that transference from generation to generation of what are we passing on to the next group of humans. And she looked, if you read Ghosts in the Nursery, you'll see that her main focus was looking at mothers' history of traumatic experiences and what is that impact on the growing fetus, and then when they're born, the impact on the baby's life. So she sadly passed away at the young age of 63. She wasn't very old at all, and she had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. So, that was a tragic way to end, but she gave us so much while she was alive. And, we always want to pay homage to the people that came before us. And that's actually something that I'm going to really give credit to that idea to Dr. Janet Courtney, who we will talk about later. And she really honed in on that through the FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy intensive that I took last year. So she really reminded me that it's best that we give credit to where it's due. So far, Dr. Winnicott and Selma are on our list today. So we want to think as well about infant and early childhood mental health as being interdisciplinary. So I hinted at that a little bit ago. And what does that mean though? So again, we want to think systemically. We want to think about who are all the people and systems that the child is connected with and a part of. So we want to think about the child care team, whether that's in the home or out of the home, whether that's family or professionals. We want to think about the healthcare team, the doctors, the nurses, any other medical interventions that babies and littles go through. We want to think about the public health sector and that team, child welfare, the education and special education teams. Those are vital. We know that, right? And especially if children go into an academic setting, very young, we want the teachers to be understanding of infant and early childhood mental health. The juvenile justice system, right? Maybe we don't think about them when it comes to infant and early childhood mental health. But not only is this sector and this population preventative work, it's also, well, that's the point actually, it's preventative work. We want to give infants and littles the best tools and resources that we can, so that as they get older, maybe the juvenile justice system is not the path that they find themselves in. But if they do, we want the juvenile justice system and those folks to be as educated and resourced as possible as well for serving, the child population and teen population. Obviously, we want to think about the mental health team. We want to think about ourselves. What is our role serving these children and these infants, and how do we support them and their grown-ups? We also want to think about the early childhood family education teams out there. Maybe where you're from, there's it's a different title for that group, but where I'm from, we call it ECFE, Early Childhood Family Education. And then, this might be obvious, but maybe not, but we want to think about the political system. Who are the policymakers out there in our local governments and our larger government. You know, those are the people that we really, really need to be connecting with, or, you know, somehow getting the information to them, because, right, the policies that they make can make lasting effects on infants and young children over, you know, years, generations, even potentially. So we want them to have the best education and knowledge about this group in particular. So we're going to go ahead and shift to talking about brain development. If you are a seasoned clinician, this is information that you know, right? And if you're new to this field, welcome to the topic of neuroscience. So we have really shifted in the mental health field over, I'm going to say, the last decade, maybe two. That's based off of just as I've been doing research and learning about neuroscience. And we've come to realize that it's very important for us to understand, when we think about child development and infants in early childhood, you know, what is going on in their brains? What does this actually look like? What's happening for them? You know, and I truly believe knowledge is super important for us to be able to understand anything and our fellow people. So if we can have the knowledge of what's going on in children's minds, then we can be better equipped on how to serve them and what interventions need to happen. And that actually makes me realize I forgot to give a shout out when we talked about the interdisciplinary team. You know, I should have kind of been more specific with the healthcare team, not only doctors and nurses, but, you know, thinking about pediatric occupational therapists and physical therapists, speech pathologists and therapists. We want to give them a shout out as well. So if you're listening from that lens, I apologize for not adding you right away, but, you know, we want those folks to also have this knowledge about brain development and infant and early childhood mental health as best as possible. So depending on, you know, the literature, you'll get different percentages of the brain development stat. So I just kind of molded it all together. And what we know is that in the first 5 years of life, we have 80 to 90% of brain development, you know, of our, what eventually becomes our adult brain. So let's just pause and think about that for a second. In 5 years' time, from the moment we're born until about 5 or so, and right, we're going to always think about things vary depending on, you know, if there are any challenges along the way, or traumas or stressors or anything like that. You know, things do vary. But in general, 80 to 90% of our brain gets developed in the first 5 years of life. That is a massive amount of development. That is huge. And that is so extensive. And if you think about, you know, someone in your life, present or past, who is in the age range of 0 to 5, it makes sense, right? There's so much happening for them. There's so much going on for them. And some days you're like, what is happening here? You know, like, what is going on? Like, why are they acting this way or behaving this way or, you know, talking this way? But wait, they didn't do this yesterday. And now all of a sudden they can do this today. You know, what is happening? That's because of this. That's just because of how our brains develop. So if we think about, you know, more details of that, in the first few years of life, more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second. Every second, more than 1 million. I don't do that. I don't do math, and I can't do that math. So even if we did, like, it's just a lot. That's a lot of connections that are happening in the first few years of life. And if you can remember back to, like, maybe Psych 101, or, you know, if you've gone through neuroscience training or, you know, education before, you'll, you know, maybe be familiar with the word pruning. So eventually our brains do what's called pruning, and we are basically, so the brain grows and the connections are made, but then the pruning happens. And it's when the brain is reducing the circuits. in some ways so that the brain can be more efficient. So there's a lot happening up there in these early years. And the way that the brain is developed and how it's structured, as you can see here, it's a bottom-up process. So the emotional brain comes first and the thinking brain comes last, right? So if you, so I don't know all the perfect words for the brain, so I'm not going to use any because I don't want to get them wrong. But, you know, if we think about that bottom-up process and the emotional brain first and then the thinking brain last, we want to be mindful of, you know, bottom up. So this is the brain stem down here, and somewhere down in here is the limbic system, and that's where the amygdala is housed. And, you know, in general, this area is that emotional part. And then up here is the cortex. You know, there's different types of, or parts of the cortex, but this part here is behind our forehead, give or take. And this is that thinking part of the brain, right? So executive functioning skills, and then shout out to fellow ADHDers. This is where we struggle, right? Because executive functioning is hard for us. So as the brain develops, we're looking at basic vision is developed first, and then our hearing and our early language skills, and then eventually, right, the higher cognitive functions. So the brain is moldable, and it can, you know, change and be influenced. And then there's the two hemispheres. The right hemisphere is dominant for the first 3 years of life. You know, children live in the moment. Then there's minimal logical thinking or words to express feelings. And then eventually the left brain comes online, left hemisphere, and then the integration happens where we want to think horizontally and vertically. So one thing, well, a lot of things actually, but like in general, if we think about integration, what helps the brain integrate? What helps the brain really solidify and put all the things together? And that's experiences, you know, and the more positive experiences we have, you know, the more health in general we'll have. So obviously, you know, stress and trauma happens, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we want to think as much as we can in terms of hope that because the brain is moldable, you know, things can change even later on in life, and intervention can help. So another thing that I wanted to show you all is, you know, one way that, you know, what helps the brain develop is what we call serve and return. So I wanted to show this video.
Did you know that you can help build a child's brain?
Those are bananas.
Everyday interactions can have a big impact on developing brains throughout childhood, starting even before babies can talk.
Scientists call this serve and return. Like a game of tennis or ping pong, a child serves by showing an interest in something, and the adult responds in a supportive way.
Finding moments throughout the day to do it is easy and fun, and you'll be building strong brains. You can use 5 steps to practice serve and return with any child. Step 1, share the focus.
When a child is interested or curious, you can see it.
What's this? It's a stroller.
Watch this child look at something in a book, right there. Pointing shows interest.
Cow.
So does making a sound, like this child. And mom is paying close attention.
See baby moving those little arms and legs and focusing on the ball? That's a serve.
The key is paying attention to what the child is noticing.
Oh, you like those guys too?
Look at Grandpa sharing the focus.
By noticing serves, you will help build curiosity, and you'll strengthen your relationship.
Step 2, support and encourage.
You can return a child's serve by saying a word of encouragement.
That's right. Very good.
Watch Grandpa return this serve by saying thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Even a facial expression can encourage a child.
Orange.
Or emotion, like this mom dancing.
Time. A.
You can also pick up the object that the child is pointing to and bring it closer.
We need help to sit her down. Need help.
Things like helping and playing with the child let them know that their thoughts and feelings are heard and understood. Step 3. Name it.
Yeah, the puppy. See the windows, the house.
When you return a child's serve by naming what they are seeing, doing, or feeling, you make important language connections in their brain.
He's got bumps all over him, huh?
This brain building happens even before a child can talk or understand your words.
You can name anything: a person, a thing, an action, a feeling, or a combination.
Clean up, everybody do your shit.
When you name what a child is focused on, you help build understanding of the world around us and what to expect from it.
The baby's sitting. Ooh, the baby's sitting in the back seat of the car.
You like those? Those are raisins. You have raisins all the time.
Naming also gives a child words to use later and shows that words are important to you.
Step 4. Take turns back and forth.
Taking turns helps children learn self-control and how to get along with others.
Waiting is crucial. When you return a serve, give the child a chance to respond.
How are you? I'm good. How are you?
Note that the caregiver waits here for the next serve.
See this toddler navigating a new adventure? Grandpa is waiting patiently, returning serves by asking questions and then waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah.
You want to cover it?
Yeah.
Are you cold?
Yeah.
Oh, put this over your lap like this, okay? There. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Oh.
By waiting, you give the child time to develop ideas and build confidence and independence.
Step 5. Practice endings and beginnings.
You want to go over there?
Children signal when they're done or ready to move on to a new activity.
Watch how this child shows it's time to start something new. Letting go of a toy signals an ending. Then picking up a new toy signals the next beginning.
Wanna play with the giraffe?
Sharing the focus is important in this step.
Ooh, the big eagle.
Because this mom is sharing the focus, she notices when her child is ready to end one activity and begin something new.
X, Y, and Z.
When you can find these moments for a child to take the lead,
I'm gonna try this one.
you support the child in exploring their world
Would you like to play with something else?
and make more serve and return interactions
Yeah, you wanna
possible.
sit there?
Serve and return interaction is critical for a child's developing brain. And the best news is that you can do it anytime, anywhere, without any need for toys or technology.
Look for small opportunities throughout the day, like while you're making a snack or while you're grocery shopping. What matters most is that you're doing each of these 5 steps. Notice the serve and share the child's focus of attention. Return the serve by supporting and encouraging. Name it, take turns going back and forth, and practice endings and beginnings.
Serve and return interactions make everyday moments fun and become second nature with practice. Try practicing with a child today.
What a fun video, right? I mean, what a great opportunity for us to interact with young children and babies in our lives. Like I said, in a variety of settings. And you don't even need toys to serve and return process. We'll talk more about serve and return a little later when we jump into the FirstPlay work and the FirstPlay topic. So we're going to jump into talking about attachment. You know, if you work with children in any capacity, you're probably very familiar with this information. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we're going to do sort of like a crash course, if you will, just to refresh our minds and then, you know, introduce it to those that are not familiar. So when we think about attachment, we always think about John Bowlby, right? He lived from 1907 to 1990. And Dr. Bowlby, actually, my apologies to him. And he was a British psychologist, psychiatrist, and psychoanalyst. So he lived in London, and he was part of an upper middle class family, and he was the 4th of 6 children. So he was primarily raised by his nanny, And literature says that he felt like his mother didn't want to spoil him and his siblings, so there wasn't a lot of connection there. And his father actually also had minimal interactions with them. So similar to Dr. Winnicott, actually, Dr. Bowlby talks about how, his early life experiences influenced him and shaped him for all the different ways that they did. So in the 1950s, he focused his work on working with, and this is, words at that time, but hospitalized and institutionalized youth separated from their parents. And out of that work is what he developed, as attachment theory. So when we think about attachment, we actually want to think about both the attachment and the bonding in the relationship. So it's actually two different things. So usually a lot of literature will kind of put attachment and bonding together and it's the same definition, but they actually are different. So attachment, is an affectional bond or tie between an individual and an attachment figure, usually a caregiver or guardian. But then the attachment specifically is the baby's ability to to build a deep connection with their parents or caregivers. And the bonding part is the parents' ability to build deep connections with their infants. So the behaviors drive the infant's ability to attach. So the parents and the caregivers' behavior specifically. So that's why we want, like I said earlier, to not only spend time and attention on the babies and the littles, but we want to give their grown-ups a lot of support and wraparound connection and services and intervention when needed. And even for those families that are, resourced and have a lot of health and protective factors, we also want them to be able to know where can we go, who can we go get support from if things take a turn for our family. So that's very interesting, right? That it's different attachment and bonding. So if, I have my baby doll here, Love is what I call her, and she is my model. She's my model for when I do FirstPlay and, other presentations along with this one. But it's just interesting to think that, and we'll dive into this more, but, baby gives us cues and bids for attention, but it's really our responses and our ability to, connect back that really drives that attachment, baby's ability to attach to us. So it's just a very interesting process. And Dr. Bowlby believed that attachment was formed in a hierarchy. So he talks about primary, secondary, and tertiary, like that word, right? And so primary would be parents, primary caregivers who are with babies most of the time. Secondary, he talked about, family members, teachers, professionals. Tertiary, similar, but a primary caregiver could be, a professional, right? Depending on, if baby starts daycare early on, and is at daycare for the majority of the day, that primary attachment figure could be their daycare provider. So we want to think in different terms. So moving forward with attachment, Dr. Mary Ainsworth probably is very familiar to everyone. She lived from 1913 to 1999, and she was an American and Canadian developmental psychologist. So she studied under Dr. Bowlby, and she, was working in the attachment world. And she actually developed the strange situation in 1965. And we're going to watch a little clip about that. But it was through this experiment that she actually came up with her 4 categories of attachment. And that information is still what we use today. So secure, anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and disorganized. And as you'll see in the video, the interesting thing about the strange situation is while it was important to see how the babies reacted when their mothers left the room, and that'll make more sense in a second, what they were really looking for is, how does baby respond when mom comes back? And that's where Dr. Ainsworth, thought the attachment category, if you will, that's how they really figured that out, was that, upon the return. So we've got a video about that.
This experiment, which I watched through a two-way mirror, is designed to gauge how secure is the crucial relationship between mother and child.
Okay, this bunny is going to go here, and that bunny will be on top.
The value of the test has been established in studies that would watch a child, 1-year-old, and then follow it up and interview them about their relationships to their parents when they were 21 years old. So we're quite confident in the long-term significance of this relationship.
Peter, that's Peter.
After several minutes' play, the mother is signaled to leave the room.
Sweetie, I'll be back in 1 minute, okay? I'll get you back in 1 minute.
It's upsetting for you. Shame, I feel. But she'll survive. The key moment in the experiment is the child's reaction to her mother's return.
Hi. Hi. It's okay.
The important clue is whether the baby's able to become calmed down by the contact with the mother and get back to play. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. But you see, when the mother was out, she was only interested in the mother, no interest in the toys. Now she has a contact with the mother, she's beginning to show a little interest in the environment, and shortly she'll be right back with the toys where we started.
So you would call this a secure one?
Yes, yes.
She's certainly much happier.
Goes to the door following her. Now, we sent the mother right back in, but the point here is not to distress the baby. We're just trying to challenge it. The baby puts her hands to her face in a sad expression, puts her face down. When she picks her up, she keeps her head down, her arms out, and then she sits in the chair holding the baby. The baby's still sullen. He's low-keyed.
So you would call this insecure attachment?
Yes, insecure. He's avoidant. He's not engaging her, and the reunion's not effective. And it's important to remember here that the thing that upset him was her absence. Her return should be the solution to his problem. Now this is another pattern that we see in babies who are not good at using their mother as a secure base at home. This baby is also insecure. But you'll see, we get a look at his play before the separation. The mother's left, and when she returns, she picks him up. He can't calm down. He's still upset. She offers a toy to amuse him or to comfort him or to distract him, and he slaps it away. She offers another. He slaps it away. He's angry. We call these babies resistant or ambivalent because they both want her back and yet can't use the contact. We think that the difficulty is that in the past, when he sought comfort, she's been inconsistent as to whether she's available and responsive or not.
Interesting, right? So a couple different versions of, what that attachment could look like. So that's something that when we work with this population, these littles, we want to be able to understand how to assess for the attachment and bonding relationship, but then also what do we do with it and how do we support it if there is an insecure attachment? What interventions and tools and even modalities are out there to support the relationship? So, I don't want to scare anybody. And again, if you know this information, it's not new to you. But when we think, like I said earlier, about infant and early childhood mental health care being preventative, there is a lot of research and data out there that does show a connection between our earliest attachment category and relationships and the connection to our relationships later on in life, whether that's with peers or coworkers or especially romantic partners. So if you have heard of Sue Johnson, she created emotional focused couples therapy, EFT, and she actually recently passed away. So that was a very sad loss in our field. But she, her model is based out of attachment. Other pieces too, and I'm not very well versed in EFT, so forgive me if I get anything wrong for those who use it or know it well. But the one thing that I do know is that there is a connection there with attachment theory and helping then couples work on their attachment. So again, our work with these littles and these babies is vital. We really want to think, how can we support them throughout our lives? So when we're thinking of attachment, we also want to think about stages of development. So Erik Erikson, he, someone that we all learn about in Psych 101 rather, and he developed his stages of psychosocial development. And he said that from birth to 18 months old, the stage of development that we're trying to successfully accomplish is what he called trust versus mistrust. So this is the time when we are completely dependent on our caregivers for that physical, emotional, and mental needs. So if you look at this this little picture here, let's see here. Here's infancy. Stages of development. Again, thinking about preventative and systemic pieces and lenses. Our ability to succeed that trust versus mistrust development impacts all these other developments later on in life and into adulthood. So when we're working even with and serving even those older children, 1, 2, 3 years old and then older, depending on what they're coming to us for, we want to think in terms of, development, but then history, right? So I always recommend doing a very comprehensive history taking in your first, 1 or 2 sessions or meetings, depending on what your role is for families with these littles. And to get as much information as you can about birth to 18 months, but birth to 5 especially, but also prenatally. So I actually have in my intake and consent paperwork, I have a document of, it's called, I call it a questionnaire, and it has all sorts of questions for the parents and caregivers to fill out about the child. And the entire section in my paperwork about prenatal, birth, and postpartum, time of that child's life. So I'm assessing for, what was the quality of the pregnancy like? Was this pregnancy even planned? Were the parents happy, about the pregnancy? What were their, mental health experiences and emotional health experiences, even physical health experiences during the pregnancy? And then same questions to, the birth period and then postpartum period. And, when we think about the pregnancy part, right, we want to think about internal working models and implicit memories. So, and that even goes, up until, I believe it's, about 18 months that, the memories shift. So implicit memories are unconscious and automatic. They're inside of our nervous system. They're inside of our brains at a deep level. And those, implicit memories help develop that internal working model of ourself and of the world. So some examples of what an internal working model sounds like, well, the questions rather are, am I lovable? Am I worthy? Is the world safe? Can others be trusted to meet my needs? These are questions, right? Even though we're not in a conscious, and higher level brain mind yet as fetuses and infants and young ones, but it's our experiences and those relationships, those attachments and bonds that do help our system formulate those questions and get those answers to those questions. You know, if we have a parent or caregiver in our early life that is just struggling with their own, you know, mental health or physical health, and they just are really having a hard time meeting our needs, or, you know, let's say, you know, I guess mental health would be influenced, you know, by this, but let's say they were not given, you know, a caregiver or parent that understood how to meet their needs, then their blueprint, their internal working model is not set up per se in some ways to, you know, help their child in the healthiest way. But remember, the brain is moldable, and infant and early child mental health is systemic, and it's interdisciplinarian. So there's hope. You know, we don't want to hear this and go, oh my gosh, wow, what a doom and gloom presentation and topic. There's so much hope. Intervention and resources can make so much of a difference and can really support families. So just something to keep in mind. And, you know, even the older kids that we serve, we want to think about what are their internal working models of self and the world, but where do those come from? How historical are those internal working models? And in our play therapy practices, how far back do we anticipate the child is going to go developmentally to do the healing and repair and the processing? So depending on your theoretical orientation in play therapy, that will help you answer those questions and support that child through that work.
And Candace, we have a question from the chat, just in relation to attachment. Has there been any research or correlation that you know of between showing avoidant attachment in those early stages and a later autism diagnosis?
Oh, that is a great question. I am so happy that that was asked. I sadly don't have that information. I don't have that knowledge. And that is because I'm actually diving into that world myself and finally starting to learn about the world of autism. So I am a certified AuTPlay practitioner. That is a play therapy framework, a neurodiversity affirming one rather, and we can apply that to all of our work in the play therapy world. And I'm just so fresh in learning and getting more experience with neurodivergent neurotypes such as autism, you know, ADHD, etc. So I hope one day I'll have that answer. Whoever asked that question, you know, if you get that answer soon, feel free. I put my email up at the end. Feel free to shoot me an email, or if I find that answer, if you're, you know, welcome to share your contact info with me, I'll get it to you. But I'm so sorry I don't have that answer. But that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, you know, how does this information apply to neurodivergent neurotypes? And especially autism, right? Because there is potentially a social aspect there. And what does that mean for their infancy and their early childhood, and then of course later in life? So really beautiful question. Thank you for asking. And I feel so bad that I don't have that answer yet, but hopefully one day. So the main conclusion of attachment, you know, that I want to present today is that Dr. Bowlby said, you know, to grow up mentally healthy, the infant and young child should experience a warm, intimate, and continuous relationship with his mother or permanent mother substitute in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment. And when we talk about play, we'll talk about how shared enjoyment and, you know, shared experiences are super important for building that attachment and bond. And then we'll revisit that again when we talk about FirstPlay. So let's chat about some ways to build that healthy attachment and bonding. So we want to think about the nervous system through this process and how to develop a nervous system that can ride the waves of dysregulation, essentially, right? If you're part of the EMDR world, the terminology that you'll be familiar with is window of tolerance. So if you think about, you know, like, let's say this is our window, we all have one. What is our tolerance and ability to be emotionally and mentally regulated? And we'll talk a little bit about how regulation and calm are not the same thing, it turns out. But when we are hyper aroused, right, anxious, excited, chatting a lot, moving around a lot, those are just some examples. We're out of our window of tolerance up here, we're hyper aroused. But then there's the hypo aroused, we're below, but also out of our window of tolerance. We're maybe dissociating, we're depressed, we're sad, we're somber, and both states of arousal are actually survival. And that's for a different presentation, but just something to keep in mind. So when we're thinking about that attachment and bonding experience between grown-ups and babies, we want to think about helping baby learn how to ride the wave of dysregulation. So we want to give them experiences of upregulation in our relationship with them, and then downregulation. And we'll talk in more detail about what that looks like, especially with FirstPlay. So we want to have attunement with our babies, right? We want to make eye contact. We want to show them you're interested using your body language. And we want to stay curious. What is my baby trying to tell me? And you might be thinking, what do you mean tell you? Like they can't speak. And we'll address that in a bit more detail in a little bit. But in some ways, yes, they are communicating to us. So we want to stay curious. What could their signs and cues mean? And what are they trying to tell us? We want to talk to them, and we want to name their feelings. So I'm going to grab baby love here, right? When we're holding a baby and they're crying and we're doing what we're trying to console them, maybe we're shushing them, even though, right, we want them to be able to know that they can cry. It's okay to cry. And we're trying to figure out what's going on here. How can I help? We can give them, even at the youngest of ages, oh, baby, it sounds like you're really sad right now. I hear that you're crying, right? And so they're hearing that language. And the more that we give it to them when they're younger, and then we build upon that, that actually helps their emotional intelligence develop and their ability to share their own feelings. What an interesting piece is with the emotional intelligence development is the interoception development. So that is our body's ability to connect to our somatic experiences. So for example, if we're anxious, we might feel that butterflies in the tummy feeling, right? And that is our interoception ability. Okay, oh, there's that funky feeling in my tummy. So depending on what baby is doing, we can give them that information. Let's say they're old enough to sit up already. And as they're crying, their arms are flailing around and they're throwing their toys. Then we can say, oh, baby, it looks like you're really sad. I'm here with you. You can do this. We can get through this. Oh, yeah, you're throwing your toys, you're flailing your arms, right? You're really, really mad. Now you're mad because you're really, really upset, or you look really upset, or, you're frowning. So making any sort of connection to their bodies and their feelings can be really helpful. So also touch. This is a super important part. So there is data out there and literature that now has evidence that people can actually die if they don't have appropriate amounts of touch, particularly infants and littles. So touch is everything. And we're going to talk more about touch when we discuss FirstPlay. But we want to have calming and soothing touch, cradling, hugging, feeding, kissing. And when our babies are tiny, we want to be touching as much as possible and holding as much as possible. I know, I don't know if, you're going to watch from a different country or if you're part of a different culture, but here in America, we are very, it seems, touch adverse in a lot of ways. And we don't support that contact very much for parents with their littles. You'll hear people, even professionals out there say, oh, don't pick up your baby when they're crying, you're going to spoil them. And maybe that one is not as much as it used to be. But, you might hear folks today even still say, oh, you let your baby sleep on you. Like, they're going to become too independent. They're not going to be able to sleep by themselves. or you sit in their room and rub their back while they fall asleep, like they're not going to be able to self-soothe and get themselves to sleep. What the data shows is the complete opposite. So what the data shows is that if we're not touching our babies or the ones that we're caring for, and we're not helping them learn how to soothe, their internal working model actually becomes some version of, I'm unlovable, I'm not worthy, you know, the world is not safe, my people are not safe, or they can't meet my needs. And what one might perceive as a baby, you know, self-soothing and not crying so much anymore, is actually a baby who's shutting down, and one who's already learned, kind of similar to that video that we saw, like, I can't trust this person, so I'm just going to stop crying because, like, what's the point? And that's a pretty severe example, but you know, it's a bell curve. There are different versions of those sides. So we want to be touching babies, you know, in these healthy ways as early as possible and as much as possible. And that's also teaching them, and we're going to dive into this even more with FirstPlay, but we're going, you know, we want them to learn what is healthy touch and what is appropriate touch, right? So again, preventative work, but thinking systemically and into the future. If we can have a blueprint of healthy touch, then ideally we're growing up with peers and romantic partners that involves healthy touch. So along with touch, there's nurturing activities like lullabies and infant massage. And lullabies are, that's a really fascinating topic. I remember Dr. Courtney talking about this in the FirstPlay Intensive, and she played some clips for us of lullabies from around the world. And I don't know all the details, and so I won't speak too much of it, but I'll just kind of put a little bug in your ear to do some research on lullabies. There is data out there that talks about how lullabies are beneficial for babies in all cultures and in all languages. And actually, there's a point in time developmentally that it doesn't matter what language the lullaby is in, all infants would respond the same way. So that's really fascinating, that, you know, attachment and bonding and these, you know, ways to develop that can really transcend across cultures. And that's really, really exciting. You know, it just brings us more connected, I think, as, you know, humans. And then of course, play with your babies, play with your little kids, play as much as possible. You know, they really do need us to play with them. Peekaboo, you know, how big is baby? If you don't know that one, you know, you could hold up baby like this or put them on your lap, either standing or sitting, and you go, how big is baby? So big. And you're looking at them the whole time. And, you know, if they're in a good mood, in a receptive mood, they're going to have those big eyes and they're going to smile and they're going to laugh with you. And then, you know, in that way, you're doing serve and return as well. You know, baby smiles and coos, you smile and coo back, and then baby responds. So you're having that nice volley back and forth. So that's always a fun one. And then singing with excitement, you know, and play can have that upregulating and downregulating experience. So upregulating, how big is baby? We're upregulating them. We're bringing their emotional experience up, you know, in a hyper aroused state. We're getting them excited. But then when we're coming down, we can go, I love you, baby. You're just so sweet. And so we're coming down with our voice and we're coming down with our bodies. And so we're downregulating and we're giving them that emotional wave, that experience to come in and out of their window of tolerance. So when it comes to, you know, how to do this as well, Dr. Winnicott said, you know, his data and research back in the 50s, he was researching what he called good enough parenting. And his data showed that 30% of the time is what's needed to give good enough parenting to develop a secure attachment. Let me pause. I'll say that again. In order to develop a secure attachment with your baby, good enough parenting has to happen, according to Dr. Winnicott's research, only 30% of the time. What? So, that information I think needs to become viral, right? Put it on your TikToks, put it on your Instagram, share his research everywhere and get this information out to parents, because our parenting culture is rough, especially if you're a new parent. There is so much shame and guilt. There's so much judgment that's put onto parents, right? And we can get caught up in our own thoughts and feelings when we watch a dyad or a triad interacting and, oh, what are they doing? And I would do it that way, and that's going to mess them up and blah, blah, blah. And we need to always, if our thoughts and feelings go that way, stop and check in with ourselves. Like, what do we need to give ourselves to feel better right now? But then remember this statistic. But here's the really important piece with this. So yes, 70% of the time, there's going to be ruptures and disruptions. That doesn't mean, though, that we just let it be. So what also helps develop that secure attachment and bond is repair and reattuning. So rupture, repair, rupture, repair, rupture, repair. That is the secure attachment dance, basically. That's what develops it. If we, scream at our babies that we're taking care of, or, ours, and we don't go back and repair somehow and help baby understand, or little one understand, I was upset, I'm so sorry, I got to work on my deep breathing or taking a time in, or whatever we do as a coping skill. I apologize, I bet that was very scary, huh? And helping your baby, and your child as they get older, use that feelings language, and accepting that, yes, my actions created this experience for them. How do we repair, and what are we going to do better moving forward? So that's the main key. That repair and reattunement is vital. So pretty interesting data there. When we talk about attachment and bonding and that upregulating and downregulating experience, we also want to talk about co-regulation, because that's essentially what co-regulation is. So it's about the relationship, and it's about us telling babies, I am, able to handle what you're going through right now. You're safe. I got your back. We can do this. And, we're lending our brains and our nervous systems to baby. So if you know about synergetic play therapy, Lisa Dion is the creator of that play therapy model. And she talks a lot about how regulation and calm are different experiences. So I use this example that she used. She came to and present at the Minnesota Association for Play Therapy back in 2020. And I was still living there at that time. And I thought we got lucky that she was able to present for us before COVID, really hit, the US, and we understood what was going on, and then before lockdown happened. So I remember her standing at the front of the room, and she was pretending to hold a baby. But she gave this example to, talk about how they're different, about how, baby's crying and you're rocking them and you're tapping their back, and maybe you're shushing them, maybe, you're telling them, you're okay, I've got you, no need to cry, or whatever you're saying or doing. And she was saying how, you're not calm as the grown-up, right? Maybe your heart is racing, maybe you're sweating, maybe you're crying, right? Maybe you're so stressed out that you're crying. And then you're thinking, I'm a terrible grown-up, I don't know how to care for this baby, oh my gosh, this baby hates me, etc., etc. Well, she said that our ability to actually connect to our thoughts and feelings and somatic experiences is the concept of being emotionally regulated. It's a connection to ourself. I'm noticing, I'm thinking my baby hates me. I'm noticing my heart is racing. I'm noticing I'm feeling sad, anxious, depressed, mad, hopeless, whatever. But we are not actually calm, because we are, crying, we're racing thoughts, we have a fast heartbeat, we're sweating, whatever. So in order for us to have that co-regulation experience successfully, though, with our littles, and then as they get bigger, is we need to do what's called self-regulation, right? We want to help our own selves understand, I am safe, I can handle this, and baby is having a hard time. They're not bad, they're not jerks, they're not trying to make my life, just a terrible experience. They are having a hard time. Obviously, the caveat here, right, is that this is easier said than done. Being a human is way more complex than this. And kind of like what I said earlier, is if our blueprint is not one that involves this experience, it can feel really challenging to practice it and then to pass it on. So as we are, participating in self-regulation and then, offering it to our baby as the co-regulation, we want to help observe and, like I said earlier, name the feeling. We want to accept the feeling. We want to normalize the feeling. And like I said earlier, to help identify that somatic experience. So what the data shows actually is our ability to self-regulate as older kids, teens, and grown-ups is based off of how many experiences of co-regulation we've had early on in our life. And there's not a particular number, not anything that I've seen, but in general, what I want you to think about is the more co-regulation we've experienced early on in life with our primary or even secondary attachment figures, the more ability we have to self-regulate, as we get older. So that's really saying something, right? And again, kind of a daunting topic and piece of information, but we want to stay grounded in our hope and stay grounded in that this work is preventative and really, really great to help make change for babies and their grown-ups. So obviously, right, when we think about all this, we think about hopefulness, prevention, positive, negative, neutral, and we do need to think though in some aspect like what can go wrong, what is going wrong, and that's like, maybe a judgmental word, and maybe there's a better word to say it, but my point is, what needs support, right? What for the individuals and what for the relationship needs support, if anything, and how can we give that support? So if you're familiar with Dr. Ed Tronick, you know that he created the still face experiment, and I'm going to show you a clip. And for those who don't know this experiment, I just want to preface with, it can be a little hard to watch. So this is one of those moments where I'm going to invite you to really take care of yourselves as you're watching this clip that I'm going to show you. But he's an American developmental and clinical psychologist out of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And he created the Newborn Behavioral Assessment Scale and the Touchpoints Project with T.B. Brazelton, and the NICU Network Neurobehavioral Assessment Scale with Barry Lester. So I'm going to show you this clip. And I always, just like I said, as you take care of yourself, I always have to breathe through this experience. So join me in breathing if you need to.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So see, yeah, not very easy to watch. There are newer experiments for the still face and data that involves dads. So that's very exciting, just to see, how does that relationship, what does that relationship look like with this experiment, and, just adding more information to the topic. But again, it's information for us to be aware of. We want to know how to look for these dynamics and assess for these dynamics. So then we know how do we help and support and get folks connected to, resources. So kind of with that piece in mind, when we think about, where are the challenges and, where is the support and intervention needed, we want to think about the ACEs. So for those who are unfamiliar, the ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and they were essentially identified based out of an experiment back in, oh my goodness, I forgot the date. I'm having a blank. So forgive me, but it was carried out by Kaiser Permanente, and they looked at 18,000 participants for this study, which is huge. That's a massive study. And what they came up with are these, this list here of adverse childhood experiences. So abuse and neglect, parents' mental illness, divorce, substance abuse, violence against the mother, and having a relative who has been sent to jail or prison. So over time, people have, talked about the ACEs and how it's not very inclusive anymore. There are many experiences such as racism, losing a caregiver, involvement with the juvenile justice system or foster care system, even wars, conflict, stuff like that, those things need to be added to this list as well, because those are experiences that can absolutely and do absolutely impact infants and young children. So, this study was just so interesting because, we'll talk about, what does this mean for the future? But again, where can the interventions lie? Where can we get the interdisciplinary team together to wrap around families who need support and care and intervention? So the impact on the ACEs, if they're not addressed, essentially, is a lot of challenge later in life. And we still, in our culture, have this level of belief rather, that infants don't have any connection to trauma. They're not they're not influenced by trauma or stress. It doesn't impact them, right? If we go back for a second, right, the one ACE is violence against the mother. So, some folks feel and believe that, well, if there is violence in the home and let's say baby is in their room, or toddlers in their room sleeping or playing or whatever, and parents are down the hall or in another part of the home and they're fighting, well, baby's not around, like it's not going to impact them in any way. Well, what we know from the research and the data now, that that's actually not true, right? We want to think again, let's go back to that implicit memory piece. So they can hear potentially the arguments, or they can feel the tension between their parents or caregivers even after the fight is done. And that experience gets stored in baby's brain, the nervous system, how it gets stored. And depending on the intensity of the experiences and the frequency, right, will determine in some capacity how the brain and nervous system holds on to those experiences. And then those implicit memories are created, and then it can become like a domino effect. So babies are very much aware of what's going on in a lot of different ways. And so when we talk about FirstPlay in a second, we're going to talk about how to prepare the grown-ups before engaging with baby in, the story that we teach them. So as you can see here, some of these lifelong or later in life issues, chronic health problems, mental illness, substance abuse, employment difficulties, unresolved trauma, right, if unattended or untreated. And like I was saying, the unresolved trauma impacts our nervous system, which is our command center for our entire vessel here, right? And unresolved trauma really does influence our belief system about ourselves and the world. Remember that blueprint, that internal working model. If there's conflict or scary stuff or trauma or stress that's around and it's really big and there's no repair, or it's really big and it's ongoing, the internal working model tends to lean towards, like, I'm not lovable. No one's coming around to hug me and tell me, okay, we're going to figure this out. It's okay. Or the world is unsafe. The people who should be taking care of me can't or won't, or, whatever, all those different examples and more. Some things that, you on this topic, you'll hear fellow clinicians say is, complex PTSD and developmental trauma really need to be into the, input into the DSM. They're not right now. And that's something that a lot of folks out there, I don't know who they talk to, I guess the folks that really help, create the new versions of the DSM, but they're really trying to push those two diagnoses, even though, right, like we know it's not that simple, and they're nothing to be pathologized, but diagnoses need to be in the DSM to better encompass some of these experiences that people have, right? Complex PTSD for sure, but yeah, developmental trauma, all this stuff happening when we're little, and how that impacts us throughout our childhoods, adolescence, and adulthoods. So maybe one day, but we don't want to pathologize this stuff, right? We don't want to think ill of folks that experience, and even ourselves who've experienced things and are just trying to survive in the world and make sense of their everyday and just be the healthiest they can be. It's just really, we want to love them and support them. So I know we're coming to the end soon, in about half hour or so. So I want to shift gears and end our time today talking about FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy. So this is a play therapy model developed by Dr. Janet Courtney. She's down in Florida, if you're familiar with her. And she developed FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy in the 2000s. When she was working back in the 1980s, she was in the adoption and foster care system and as an adoption foster care worker. And eventually her work connected her to Dr. Viola Brody, who created developmental play therapy. So Dr. Courtney really, studied with Dr. Brody. She was her mentor, and, she really learned through that experience about infant mental health, and then connected herself with the, different associations for infant mental health in Florida and around the world. And so, as she wrote in one of her books, you know, she had a really great experience being able to kind of titrate between the two worlds of play therapy and then infant mental health. Because, right, so even though infant mental health is interdisciplinary, and it's like we talked about earlier, it's not just play therapy and mental health, it's everybody. So I wanted to share this little stat here, part of this, because I think this is really important for us to know, but also for, you know, implementing FirstPlay. So the word infant, it turns out, derives from the Latin word infus, meaning unable to speak. So isn't that fascinating? So we still see that in our culture, right? Like we've been talking about, there are some folks that still believe that infants cannot talk, they cannot communicate, that they don't know what's going on in the world, that they're not impacted by anything or anyone until later on when they're a little bit older. But we know that that's not true. You know, the data shows the complete opposite. We absolutely are impacted by people and the world when we are infants. So, you know, I want you to take a moment and just look at these pictures. I love all these pictures. They're so cute. And they all come from the website Pexels, so they're free downloads. But, you know, we have three, what we can presume is three very different emotional states here, right? And these are just, you know, snapshots and moments of time. It's very possible that, you know, baby on the left here was crying just before this picture was taken. You know, who knows? And we can assume that, you know, baby in the middle here was asleep shortly after this picture. And then we can assume baby on the right, you know, maybe was, I don't know, laughing before this picture. But, you know, I'm going to encourage you to take a second and really like look at these pictures and see what, you know, or think rather, what could babies here be telling us maybe? You know, what are they saying to us? What do they want us to know about their experience? So maybe baby on the left is saying something like, I really love the grass that I'm sitting on, and that toy that the photographer is waving around is so cute. I want to get my hands on them. And the breeze, you know, mom and dad, or, you know, whoever is with me, grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, whomever, you know, the breeze is just so amazing right now. And I'm just having a grand old time. And look at me here. Like, I'm happy, right? We can make some of those assumptions. Baby in the middle, maybe they're saying, get me off this pillow, mom, or dad, get these scary animals away from me ASAP. I am not comfortable. Or, you know, grandpa, my tummy hurts when you sit me up like this. I don't like it. Please move me, move my body, put me down and help me lay down and feel better that way. So those are some options. And then I perceive baby on the right as actually giving some form of communication connected to what the heck are we doing here? What are you doing to me? Why are you holding me like this? What is that photographer doing holding that, you know, shaky thing? And why are all these lights so bright? And what the heck am I wearing? Like, why would you put me in this bright yellow banana suit? And why are we here? You know? So just this stink eye sort of look, right? So cute. But if we were to respond to baby on the right with, oh, you're so cute, what a funny stink eye, we might miss something. We are not necessarily that attuned to what baby needs. And then that internal working model is being formed. So, and that goes with the same with the other two babies, right? Maybe, you know, baby on the left is smiling at us, but we're having a moment and we're not smiling back, right? Like we saw in that still face. Baby's gonna be like, hello, I'm cute here. Look at me. Please smile back at me. And baby middle like pick up, and we're on our phone, or, you know, we're trying to, let's say, you know, baby is crying. We're like, hey, come on, be okay, be okay. And they were like, whoa, get away, you know, and then as they're crying, that's their signal to like back off, or I need to back off from you. I need to, you know, work on regulation. So very interesting and something to keep in mind. So FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy is, or was developed rather, for ages 2 weeks old to 3. And then Dr. Courtney has another model that's for 3 years old to 6 years old. But we're not going to talk about that model today. That's for another presentation. And I'm actually not trained in that model, so I'd have to, go through that training first as well. But it's short-term and preventative. So obviously with any play therapy modality, there's what the creators say is, the standard, length of time to be in therapy. But then obviously that can extend if need be. So FirstPlay is 6 sessions post-intake, and your intake will be how you do it. I am trained in the DC 0 to 5, so that's part of my FirstPlay intake process. And then I'm also trained in TheraPlay, so I use the MIM as part of my assessment process. My intake looks like, and then therapy starts. So like I said at the very beginning, FirstPlay is designed for grown-ups and babies, not just moms and babies. We want, dads, grandmas, grandparents, aunties, uncles, if there's a second, mother in the home, for sure. Obviously, we want anyone and anyone, on the team, if possible, to learn this experience, and if need be, come into the therapy room. So the underlying theoretical foundations of FirstPlay are listed here. Dr. Courtney really looked and included attachment theory, developmental play therapy, of course, filial therapy, family systems theory, Ericksonian-based story play. She brings in components of mindfulness and then research related to infant massage, touch, and neuroscience. So it's heavy duty, and it's, the intensive was a great experience, and I definitely recommend it if you want to work with this population. There is a virtual component and then possibly an in-person component depending on, the structure for that particular intensive. I invited her up here to Wisconsin last September, and so we did a virtual component at the beginning of the week, and then she was here for 3 days, and we got to learn in person. And then the second in-person day, we had what she calls a live lab. We invited real parents and caregivers to come with their babies, and we got to practice FirstPlay with them in real time. It was a very beautiful, beautiful experience. So these are just some of the benefits of FirstPlay. There are a lot more, but I didn't want to be a super big reader of the slides because you all can read. But the benefits include that FirstPlay strengthens the parent and child attachment and bonding, teaches infants the sensation of relaxation. It increases the playfulness and enjoyment within the parent-child relationship. Remember, playfulness and joy, shared experience, helps with that connection, and it connects to that, upregulating and downregulating experience. FirstPlay starts the process of teaching children about caring and positive touch and respect for themselves. It releases the calming and connectivity hormone oxytocin, right, the love hormone. It helps with digestion and bowel elimination, which is amazing. And it starts the process of learning about setting his or her personal boundaries around touch, the babies. And I'll explain how that works. All right, so here are sort of the steps, if you will, to the FirstPlay model. And so when you start with a client family, you will get this manual, and they actually you have your practitioner manual when you go through the training, and then you can order parent manuals, and then each parent, or dyad, whomever, they get a manual themselves that they get to keep forever, even after therapy is concluded. So this is, breaks down everything about FirstPlay, those benefits. Dr. Courtney writes a really beautiful letter to those who read the manual and go through the process. And then there are the activities and the actual therapy, component. So what we want to do first is we want to help the grown-ups experience some mindfulness, calm, and relaxation. So we go through this process with them, and I'm just going to flip to that that page in the manual here. And it's sort of like a grounding, yeah, like I said, calm and relaxation activity. And we read to them, something for them to consider as they're taking their deep breaths. And we ask them to, breathe out any uncomfortable feelings that they're experiencing and then breathe in, more comfortable ones. And eventually we ask them to place their hand on their heart and their other hand on their baby's heart. So, right, we're always making a connection, or helping the dyad rather, or the triad make a connection with baby as much as possible, involving the nurturing touch and the eye contact, all that kind of stuff. So then they're breathing, they're, connecting to themselves, they're connecting to baby. And then we invite them to imagine that there is a beautiful rainbow securely hugging around them. And I've seen this, a handful of times now, and it's a really, really interesting and beautiful experience to witness. Naturally, parents and caregivers of littles, especially infants, are, a little hyper aroused, maybe some hypoarousal as well. But there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot going on in this stage of family life. So it's really, really beautiful to watch grown-ups be able to take a moment and just leave the stuff out the door, right? Like for now, we're not going to worry about the bills. We're not going to worry about, getting the other kids to wherever. We're not going to worry about XYZ. We're just going to be. We're going to be with our baby. And that's a really, really great thing to be able to witness. So then after we help orient, parent or caregiver to the moment and help them get connected. And I will say that if baby is a little hyper aroused as well, I tend to notice that baby relaxes with parent. And that's the point. We want both as much as possible to be relaxed. And we want baby in what we call the quiet alert state. So quiet or active alert state, that's their moments where they're ready for engagement, they're ready for connection. They're giving you those cues of I'm ready, right? The eye contact, the smiling, the cooing, the reaching, any sort of cue, right? That language, they're not speaking, but their language is saying, okay, grown up, let's do this thing. I'm ready to go. So earlier, I'll back up for a second. When we look at the benefits, right, this bottom one here, starts the process of learning about setting his or her personal boundaries around touch. What an interesting concept, right? Like how can an infant or a 1, 2, 3-year-old know about that or understand that for themselves? Well, we start it as early as possible. We give them this language and this experience where before we go into what Dr. Courtney called the baby tree hug story, and that's the main part of the therapy, is we ask babies permission. So that looks something like this. And so where one thing that Dr. Courtney is different from Dr. Viola Brody with the models is that with Dr. Viola Brody in developmental play therapy, she talked about involving touch with the clinician and the child in some capacity. Dr. Courtney's model, FirstPlay, says that we, the clinicians, do not touch the baby. We don't want, right, to influence the attachment and bond in some, way such that they attach and bond with us, right? We obviously want some rapport with the baby because they're going to be our client or, their grown-up is, but we want that attachment and bonding to be between them and their grown-up. So that's why she has a spring in the baby dolls. And we model what's going on and what we want the grown-up to do on our babies while encouraging the grown-ups to do it on their babies, their real babies. So it's a very, very cool experience to be able to show grown-ups in real time what to do. So when we go into the baby tree hug story, we want to invite the grown-up to think about their baby as a tree. And then different parts of like their face and head are the moon and other parts of nature. So through the storytelling with the touch and the attunement, we're working on this attachment and bonding. And then we ask baby for permission before starting the baby tree hug story. So I might say something like, okay, baby love, And I'm looking down at her. I know you can't see her, but she's here on my desk. I'm looking down at her. Okay, baby love, are you ready? Are you ready to start the baby tree hug? And then we're looking for those cues of readiness, and essentially the answer, yes, I'm ready. And then before we start working with the legs, which is the first step of the story, we want to ask more specifically, baby, which leg do you want to start with, huh? The left one or the right one? And then we're looking for cues of readiness and cues of, answering that question. It might be a toe wiggle, it might be, a ankle turn, whatever, but just some version of a potential, I want to start with this leg. And then we go into the baby tree hug story. And we are talking to them and explaining different parts of their body as if they're trees, roots, the trunks of the tree, eventually, the moon, etc. And we're working on providing, or having, the grown-up provide the nurturing touch on their baby, on the legs, the arms, the tummy, the back, the face, the head, and the ears. So there's a lot of touch going on with baby. And upregulating and downregulating come into play here. So an upregulating moment is that when we have the one leg up, we're pretending to be a birdie, and the birdie is swooshing and coming down and woo on the baby's foot. And we're getting really excited and we're upregulating. And then we're going to downregulate when we talk about, parts of their toes and what the toes represent, and wiggling those and, giving that nurturing touch to the toes. So a lot of experience with upregulating and downregulating. So the story is quite long and extensive. So we're always teaching the grown-ups to do the best that you can throughout times a day. And when we orient them to this therapy and to the manual before therapy officially gets started, we want to help them consider, what time of day is baby usually in that active alert state, that state to be ready to engage in some sort of way. And then where in the home or community, if you're out and about, can you do this? So can you do it after bath time? Can you do it, just before nap time? Maybe baby is struggling with sleeping and that's why they're coming in to see you. So then maybe the parts of the story where they are more down regulating, you are implementing with them before they go to sleep. And then the research is showing that it does help them sleep better. So, right, because it's about helping their bodies relax and get connected, all those things. So there's a lot of different ways that folks can implement this with their babies in real time. And while we're telling this story, we're using different skills, and one is called speaking as if the baby. So similar to how I described those pictures a little early on, what is baby telling you? So maybe baby's starting to look away from their grown-up. So I might, as the clinician, say, oh, mommy, I need a break right now. Can I have a break? I'm really curious about what's on the wall over there. I just need a minute. Can we pause for a second? So that's helping the grown-up start thinking in those ways. What could my baby be actually telling me? So it's very, comprehensive and very exciting in that regard, where we're giving these grown-ups these different abilities to experience their babies. So we're helping them read baby's cues. We're helping them with that serve and return. And we're also helping them take baby breaks, right? And as they learn the cues, know when babies need a baby break. And we're using our prosodic storytelling voice. We don't want to be, even in those upregulating moments, we don't want to be super loud and obnoxious. We want to have that prosodic storytelling voice because that helps, with the storytelling, and that aids that connection, that bonding. And, what's so beautiful about FirstPlay is that Dr. Courtney calls it FirstPlay because our first experiences of play are related to our relationship with our grown-ups. So we don't need toys as a baby, right? We don't need to have a set of keys or flashy things in our face. We need this. This is what we need. And what also is part of FirstPlay Infant Play Therapy is what she calls FirstPlay activities. So those are in the back of the manual. And that, how big is baby? That's a FirstPlay activity. And one of the millions of reasons why I love FirstPlay is that Dr. Courtney really encourages families, the grown-ups, to bring in what is normal for their culture and their experience of the world. How did you experience FirstPlay activities and interactions with your grown-ups? Is there a lullaby, or is there an activity that you are passing on to your baby, or that you want to pass on? So maybe you don't ever teach a FirstPlay activity in therapy from the back of the book. You're helping grown-ups implement their, childhood experiences, those lullabies, those activities, and you're implementing the skills within those activities instead. Dr. Courtney supports flexibility with this model. Again, doing it when you can, bringing in your own twist to things, and telling the story in your own way, and not pressuring parents and caregivers to memorize the story in the manual, because it's extensive. There's a lot to the story. I don't have it memorized either, and I don't plan on memorizing it, but I'll always be carrying this manual with me for therapy sessions and read out of them. So I know we're coming to the very end here. So I just wanted to give a couple pieces of things to keep in mind that are, just sort of my soapboxes, if you will. So like I said earlier, you can never spoil a crying baby by picking them up or attending to their needs. Babies need us to be there, and now, FirstPlay is an option. And I highly recommend getting trained in this model if you want to support infants and littles. And then here are my recommendations. So based off of the science and the research that I've studied and I've done, how I understand, attachment in the infant, parent relationship, I really encourage you to study and research these two topics extensively. Cry it out, that one, and then physical punishments. And then how to not only understand those components and formulate thoughts and ideas for your own self, and then also with the physical punishments, considering the why, and obviously we want to be thinking about people's upbringings and culture, and, helping them help us understand, like, where does this practice come from? Why is it implemented? Do you still want to implement it? So just a couple things to just consider and to research extensively, if you could, especially when we serve the itty bitties. All right. And lastly, babies are whole people always. They are amazing. They deserve all the resources we can give them. I truly believe that if we put all of our time, money, and attention to the littles, we would have a very different society. So keep advocating, keep going to the policymakers, the decision makers, use your voices, use your data, use your baby models, and get the information out there. Here's my contact info, and then I will pause for Montana if there are any questions, and then any wrap up.
Yeah, I have questions. So you brought up in the beginning, like, really the systemic aspect that comes with like infant care, infant mental health. And you mentioned about how in the therapy space, you're really able to allow parents the ability to be present with baby. And so I'm curious, in just your work as a clinician, how you are kind of transitioning that into the outside world, outside the therapy space, especially when it comes to like factors such as single parent households, multiple children in the home, socioeconomic status concerns, like things like that, where time is a constraint, like especially with that presentness.
Yes, great question. So it's really getting the psychoed out there to not only the parent or caregiver, but also those systems. So as an LMFT, I was trained in systems theory. So that's how I think, not only professionally, but it connects to how I just think personally, that we all have to be involved here. So I go as much as I can around my community and give presentations similar to this one. So I'm getting out there and I'm advocating and I'm educating others that are part of the greater system. And then as far as like serving my clients in particular with all those different factors, it's really helping the grown-up think about what is good enough, right? What is good enough for your reality? And like I said with FirstPlay and how Dr. Courtney talks about it, something is better than nothing. So if all a parent has is 5 minutes a day or every other day to be with baby and to tell some part of the story or do one round of one activity, that's something. And then as we support them therapeutically, we can work as best as we can with them to, face those barriers or those challenges or hardships. And how can we, make any sort of shift or change as best as we can? That's really, in some of these circumstances, we're just doing the best we can. But yeah, it's amazing how much a little bit can go a long way. And what Dr. Courtney always talks about too is if we can get in here with the babies, and again, even just 5 minutes a day doing a part of the story, then they get used to this experience so that when they are moving and shaken, and then 1, 2, 3, they are ready and they're more willing to engage with grown up in some capacity with FirstPlay, because they're like, oh yeah, it's our time. Here we go. Let's do this thing. So it takes time. It takes, a lot of effort on our part as a clinician, and it's a lot of work outside of, the therapy room that I think if we're going to do this work, we have to do that extra work. I think it's very vital and important.
Absolutely. I think I'll be shouting that 30% statistic from the rooftops after you brought that.
Right? How amazing. It's quite incredible, actually. I mean, humans are just fascinating to me. They really are.
Yeah, and I know that we're over the hour, and so out of respect for everyone's time, please reach out to Candace at on her website that's linked in the chat, or her contact info here if you do have more questions about today's training. But I appreciate you, and thank you so much, Candace, for presenting this informative training on the littles today. And if any of you would like to check out Candace's other podcasts with more amazing information on this topic, they're linked in the chat to listen on Spotify along with that website link. And the links for the CE credits as well as the survey for this presentation are also in the chat. And for those watching the recording, all of these links will be referenced in the show notes. And so thank you everyone for listening, and don't forget that you need a training.
Thank you for joining in on today's training. We look forward to having you join us again. Heart & Solutions is proud to provide CE eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below.